With the release of American Horror Story Coven, the third season of FX's iconic show, creators decided to take this season in a different direction than what had been done in the past. Rather than focusing on horror, they decided to take the story in more of a thriller direction and offering more social and political commentary on our modern society. We pick up with a group of young women who find that they have otherworldly abilities and are witches. They are sent to a boarding school where they are taught to control their powers, all the while being victimized and threatened from people on the outside and within. With a lot of interesting questions and topics being discussed, let's waste no time and get into the true American horror stories of Coven. Madame Delphine LaLaurie was a real woman and Louisiana socialite in the early 19th century. She was accused of horrifically abusing her African American slaves. In 1830, her house caught fire, and it was revealed that she was in fact torturing her slaves to death. Fire was set by one of her servants' attempted suicide from her abuse at the hands of her master, LaLaurie. In the wake of the fire, an angry mob formed and drove her out of Louisiana, where she lived the rest of her life in France until her death in 1842. And let me just say that really goes to show just how truly vile this woman was. She was so evil that other slave owners thought she is too cruel and evil. That's really saying something. In the show, LaLaurie did not move to France, but was buried alive for nearly 200 years. Everything else of her character remains intact from her real-life counterpart. And throughout the season, we see her grow to accept others despite the color of their skin. And then not accept them, and then sort of accept them, but she's in hell being tortured, so who cares? A well-deserved fate for a slave owner. A real-life voodoo queen in the early 19th century, Marie Laveau was a real spiritual guide and hairdresser for politicians, noblemen, and many more prominent figures at the time. Again, her character was adapted fairly accurately to the show, minus the whole working with demons and killing babies thing. I'm sure she was a much nicer person than that. In the show, she is the leader of her own Coven sect, which is predominantly African American group, demonstrating that though the witches are the same, they are still divided because of the differing colors of their skins. The Salem witch trials were a series of prosecutions of people accused of witchcraft in colonial Massachusetts during the 1690s. 19 women and men were found guilty and executed as they were thought to have been in league with the devil. These killings were mentioned in the show and condemned as persecutions of people born with special gifts. Not to mention the whole killing someone because they sold their soul to Satan is a very primitive belief we know now to be wrong. In the show, this event was used as the catalyst for the point of people being objectified for being born who they are. The Axeman of New Orleans was active between May 1918 to October 1919. A serial killer whose choice of weaponry was an axe, and on one instance a razor. A man claiming to be the killer wrote a letter to the newspaper on March 14, 1919. The letter sent to New Orleans Times stated that the killer would strike again on the night of March 19th at 12:15 a.m., but would spare those who played jazz music in their homes. That night, throughout the entire city of New Orleans, much jazz music could be heard all throughout the streets, but remarkably, there were many who did not play, and there were no killings that night, which led police to come to the conclusion that the threat was a hoax. The Axeman only targeted Italian people, particularly men and their wives, unfortunate enough to be with them at the time. In the show, the Axeman was murdered by the women of the Coven, and that is why no one heard from him, because the Coven took the law into their own hands and killed a man who sought out to kill them because he wanted to. Not necessarily a true story, but more so a real and prominent figure in Haitian voodoo myth. Now, with my understanding of Haitian mythology, which, albeit, is very limited. Papa Legba is seen as an intermediary between humans and the spirit world. He demands sacrifices, and all around was fairly accurately portrayed the character's mythology. So again, not really a true story, but a real-life myth. This isn't so much a true story, more so something funny that I made a connection to real life. It's amusing the choice to feature Stevie Nick in a show about witches, as there have been rumors about the singer being a witch throughout her entire career. And this show does confirm that she is in fact a witch. So, there you go. What struck me right off the bat, the beginning of this season, was that this was when the show shifted from telling a horror narrative to telling one more along the lines of a thriller. The first 2 seasons scared me quite often, but not very much this one, except for Papa Legba. He often scared the shit out of me. This season primarily goes more so in the social commentary direction, and its story choosing to explore the evils of racism and sexism in the modern age. This season juxtaposed witches being born with great and unnatural talents creates the theme of women being forced into hiding and even persecuted for having any sense of power over men. The whole season we see men trying to take down and kill these women because they see them as unnatural or merely just in the way. Similarly, the rift between the white coven and the African American voodoo queen and her followers is an allegory for racial tensions. It is the relationship between Queenie and LaLaurie that is the driving force of this season for me. We see that by keeping an open mind with people who are different than ourselves, we can truly grow into good people. It is a great message and my favorite among this season. Overall, this season is about prejudice towards women and minorities and how we must not stand by as others take equality away based solely on the fact that you were born who you are. People are not always who they say they are, and you must pick your friends carefully. But when you have the power to do something good, we must use it. We live in a very divided time, but we must not forget that the true way to come to an understanding is by keeping an open mind and open hearts to others. And we all have a moral right to do precisely that. So I shotgunned the first 2 seasons in like 2 or 3 weeks. I'm not gonna lie, this season actually took me a little bit longer to complete because it was kind of jarring to me that the tone was very shifted from that of being horror to more so thriller with social commentary. And in general, I don't think this season is quite as good as the other seasons, and I will explain exactly what I mean. But let me just start off by saying I really did like this season, and I do think that this is one of the better ones. There are some things that bothered me. So, like I said, Queenie and LaLaurie were incredible together. The acting, the writing, everything about their interactions, every scene, everything revolving around those 2 characters growing as friends was very interesting and very well done. My favorite part of the season. And both Gabri Sidibe and Kathy Bates were very welcome additions to this show. The season started out taking place early 19th century. When I saw that, I was like, this is great. I can definitely see, like, this is going to be a great season, great period piece. Because I knew nothing about each season, honestly, before I went into it. And I had no idea what the hell was going to go on. And I had a lot of hope when the season started. But then it cut to modern day, and I just kind of, I don't know, it was kind of jarring. It wasn't bad. It just not quite as compelling, I thought. The biggest thing for me was I felt like there were a lot of not so much unnatural character progressions, but more so like sudden leaps in where these characters are going. Zoe, our protagonist, starts off as a normal teenage girl. Who finds out that she has these powers, and throughout much of the season, she is this. Up until a point, she is, in a way, very similar to a Harry Potter type character. She is the relatable character. She's relatable in the way Harry Potter is relatable, in that we, as an audience, are not accustomed to this magical world. Whenever incredibly magical things happen, He is just as amazed as we are. Harry becomes a conduit through which we express our emotions in that given scenario. If we see something amazing and magical, that is magical and amazing to Harry as well. And that's how we relate to him. And it's in the same way with Zoe. She is in a situation where she has been given frightening powers and things happen and she's terrified. And we would be terrified in that situation too. However, at a point, Madison is murdered. And Zoe takes it upon herself to lead the other witches into standing up for themselves, banding together, and finding out what exactly is going on. And in the very next episode, she ties a guy up and stabs him to death. Honestly, when I saw that, my first thought was, did I miss an episode? Did I skip an episode by accident? Like, what is going on here? I just felt like, yes, I do believe that at a point she would kill someone. However, at that particular moment, I just felt like it was such a sudden leap for her character to go from out of the fish out of water relatable character to stabbing a guy to death and savagely murdering him. It's just stuff like that happens throughout the season. It's almost as if they said, the creators and writers said, okay, we need our characters to go from point A to point C, but we don't have enough time to get to cover B, so we'll just skip it. Does that make sense? And there are just times throughout the season that I feel like the exact same thing happens multiple times. Like with Cordelia, she is shown throughout the entire season issues with her mother, and yet out of nowhere at some point she is shown to have crippling anxiety for feeling inferior to her mother. And I just felt like, okay, well, where does this come from? I personally felt like there was no real justification for why she was feeling that to the extent. I mean, she was completely distraught, and I kind of felt like there was very little reason for her to be feeling like there was very little justification for how she's feeling like that at that point. Also, in the character of Kyle going from being a Frankenstein monster to just, they cut away from him for a scene, and then when they cut back, he's perfectly fine thanks to Fiona. They needed their characters to be at a certain place at a certain time, and it just, regardless of whether or not it made sense. Almost as if this season could have benefited from being maybe an episode or two longer to cover all those bases. So again, I thought there were just some storytelling issues, and again, the season as a whole going in a different direction was pretty jarring for me. But overall, again, I think this season is, again, really great. I do think that the season is really good and worth watching, definitely. Overall, I think I'm going to give this season a 7 out of 10. Again, not perfect, but still really good. And overall, I'd say this is probably my 4th favorite season. Alright, again, thank you very much for tuning in to my video. Next week, I will be talking about the 4th season of American Horror Story, entitled Freak Show. This is where we start to get a little controversial in terms of what the fans think. Again, don't forget to comment, subscribe, and give me a like. And again, I will see you next week.